everyone, and welcome. Nice to see so many familiar faces here today for our Launch Your Postgrad Career panel. It is a pleasure to have 5 fantastic alumni from SFU join us today to talk about their experiences going through career planning and job search while at Beedie, as well as after they've graduated. There's going to be a lot of great learning today. And just to remind you in terms of how this next hour and a half will be structured, we will begin with some introductions with the panelists. We will then do some panelist questions. I will be moderating this panel, and we have developed some questions for the panelists ahead of time based on their own journeys and backgrounds. And then we're going to open it up to all of you to feel free to share your questions, comments, ideas, anything you wish with the panelists in the last 20 to 25 minutes of today's session. And we really encourage you to write your questions in our Q&A box that we have at the bottom of this, this Zoom session. So you will see, if you scroll to the bottom of your screen, a Q&A box and a chat box. You're actually welcome to use either, but the nice thing about the Q&A box is we can have you upvote people's questions. So if there's a question one of you has asked that many of you want the answer to, then you're welcome to vote that question up so that we see it in case there's a ton of questions, and we'll make sure we get that question answered. Just a few housekeeping items. If you can, of course, please keep yourself muted and your cameras off during this session. Of course, we will have all of our panelists visible as well as myself. If you have any issues, tech issues or whatnot, feel free to send a chat message to our colleague. I just want to see the Beedie Career Management Center. That would be our colleague Kenny, and he can support or find support for any of your issues if that happens. Just to note that we will be recording, or actually we are recording this session, and we also will be sharing this recording in our CMC newsletter for all Beedie undergraduate students. So if you have any issues or concerns, you're welcome to leave the session at this time regarding the recording, but just know that you won't be visible and heard during this this session because it will just, of course, be our panelists that are visible and being heard. A couple of other items. We won't be doing open networking during this event. So if you are interested in connecting and reaching out to our panelists after this event, you're welcome to. They've all said very eagerly that they're willing to have you connect with them on LinkedIn. They'll have fantastic LinkedIn profiles, and you're also willing to send them, or so you're also able, and they're willing to answer any questions or follow-up chats you'd like to have with them after today's event. So feel free to connect and reach out through LinkedIn. And one other piece, we will be sharing the bios of our panelists in the chat box. So if you just want to copy and paste those or hold on to them for future reference, you're welcome to. That will be in addition to each of our panelists introducing themselves separately in just a moment. So before we begin, I would like to say a land acknowledgement just to start off our event. And this is a traditional land acknowledgement that at the Career Management Center we like to share during our workshops and any of the events that we do have with our community at SFU and beyond. So today I am speaking to you from my home office located on the unceded traditional Coast Salish lands, including the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. We are grateful to be able to learn, live, and play on these unceded territories. And I'd like to add that I hope everyone today is feeling healthy and safe during, of course, this unprecedented time that we're still going through, where we are in a virtual and remote world. So I'm really happy that we are able to come together today in this virtual domain. Okay, so without further ado, I would love to invite our first panelist to say a few words about himself. So Navin Kumar Ravindra, would you mind unmuting and turning on your camera? Wonderful. And if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself, where you work, and what you did and when you were at Beedie, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Rebecca, for giving me this opportunity to to talk as a panelist in this event. So I'm Navin Kumar Ravindra, and I recently graduated from SFU in April 2020. At my SFU journey, I graduated with concentrations in accounting and finance. During my SFU journey, I was able to go on an academic exchange, and at the same time, I was able to do 3 internships in various accounting and business positions. And finally, I'm passionate about like financial analysis and data analytics, and that's the reason I'm working at Colliers International as a junior accountant.
I was muted for a second. Wonderful. Thank you, Navin. That's fantastic. And thank you for sharing your background at SFU as well. Okay, next we have Rob Cantborg. Rob, could you please say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, pleasure to meet you all. My name is Rob Cantborg. I just graduated in December, so not too long ago. I was in school trying to figure out what type of career I wanted to pursue. So happy to share anything that you all would find helpful and share tips that I use to get interviews to land a job. But a bit about me, I work in account development at MuleSoft, which is a subsidiary of Salesforce. But during my time at SFU, I did a few internships, was involved in a few clubs at SFU, had the opportunity to do a couple of exchange semesters, and have spent a lot of time during the pandemic daydreaming about being on a beach somewhere. But I'm excited to get the panel started and share some of the stuff that I've learned.
Oh, Rob, I completely relate. I cannot wait for my next opportunity to go somewhere with beach. I mean, I know we have beautiful water and sand here in Vancouver, but if I could fly off to Hawaii, I would in a heartbeat.
At least it's summertime now.
At least, yes, that's true. We're getting to the better part of the season. That's true. Thanks, Rob. Gayle Sisson, could you please share your camera and say a few words about yourself?
Hello, I'm happy to be here as well. So my name is Gayle. I graduated fall 2019. So I just dodged the bullet and graduated just before the pandemic hit. So, didn't have to endure the online school that I hear everyone loves so much. So for the past year, I've been working as a people and culture assistant at Eminence Organic Skincare, just kind of coordinating our onboarding, offboarding processes and learning and development events. During my time at SFU, I was very involved in the co-op program, so I completed 6 work terms working at the Terry Fox Foundation, Hatch, and actually I was the co-op student working for the co-op department, so that was fun. And yeah, very excited to meet all of you and connect with everyone tonight. Hopefully I can share some insight that would be beneficial to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Gayle. And like yourself and Navin, I think it's going to be really insightful to hear how you, I don't know if I'd use the word leverage, but perhaps leverage all of that great experience you've gained at SFU as part of your professional portfolio coming into the working world. So looking forward to hearing about that. Thanks, Gayle. Jasdeep Gill. Say, a few words about yourself.
So my name is Jasdeep. I just graduated December 2020 as well. So I had a little taste of school during COVID. I also did an internship, my very first one, during COVID with Procter & Gamble, and I'm currently an account executive at P&G. So right after graduating, I started my full-time in January, so very fresh to the role. So I think I can really relate to where everyone's at right now towards the end of their degree, and happy to answer any questions you guys have.
That's great, Jasdeep. And one thing I'm really also excited about today is to talk about these journeys you've taken, and especially yourself graduating right before or during and also before a pandemic, and how you've been able to find employment during this time. I mean, that's so inspiring. So I know there'll probably be a lot of questions from the audience around that as well. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have Alex Clare. Alex, feel free to unmute yourself and tell us a bit about you. Oh, Alex, you're still muted. Oh,
all right.
There we go.
So I just graduated from Beedie in end of fall 2020. So my background, I completed the FATM certificate program. So I did concentrations in marketing information systems. So throughout my time at Beedie, I actually transferred, and I think it was 2015, 2016 from Capilano. So I did just my last 2-3 years at Beedie. And through my time here, I've been able to join, I mainly spent my time at one club, SU Pursuit Happiness. And eventually, I wanted to do marketing. Originally, I wanted to do accounting. Then I decided to do marketing, and then I ended up in marketing information systems, BADM. So that I kind of did multiple co-ops. My first one was in employer relations and event coordinator at the Career and Volunteer Services office at SFU. And then I moved into, once I started doing the BADM courses and kind of like those, I moved into doing a data analyst co-op at Traction on Demand. And yeah, in January, after I was done graduating, as well as secure an internship at SAP as a product support engineer. So I'm happy to kind of talk about my experiences and how I got that role.
Alex, this is great. I'm also very curious about, you mentioned you joined one club, and it's interesting how your journey evolved from that, sounds like, in part from that experience. I also was a transfer student myself. I went to Kwantlen for 2 years. This was many years ago. And then I went over to UBC for my last 2 years. My sister is an SFU grad in English, but I was a UBC grad. And so I can definitely relate to being a transfer student myself. I still remember what that felt like. So there may be some interesting pieces you have around that you can share.
Sure,
we
yeah.
talk. Great. Okay, so I'd like to ask all of our panelists now to take themselves off or put themselves on camera. Sorry, you can stay muted. You can unmute yourself. But I do, like I mentioned, have some questions for each of you. So what I'd like to do at this point is to kind of do a round robin and ask each of you one of our questions. We have 2 sets. We'll see how much we get through. And then, of course, just a reminder to our attendees, please feel free to write your comments, your thoughts, your questions in our Q&A box, because we can refer back to those. And sometimes in the moment when one of the panelists is addressing or saying something, you might have an interesting question that you might not recall 45 minutes from now. So feel free to do that. The other thing I just want to recommend is if you have a question for a specific panelist, feel free to put their name in front of the question you have. You can just put their name in a dash or their name in brackets and then ask your question. And we'll keep an eye on that and make sure as best we can to get that question to that panelist. Okay, so don't be shy. This is for you, and feel free to jump in and ask your questions that we'll get to in about 45 minutes. Okay, so Navin, I'm going to start with you. You're the runner-up. So you met often with who is our manager right now, Daryl Odo. She was formerly the manager of Co-op, and with one of our colleagues, career advisors, Calvin Liu, at this Career Management Center for multiple mock interview practice. So I'd like to ask you what was useful about that practice, and what tips can you share with our audience about practicing interview questions before going to an actual interview? And feel free to talk about your own experiences of going through an actual interview and how it helped.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question, Rebecca. So I owe a lot of credit to Daryl, Calvin, and even the Career Management Center services for helping me land the job at Colliers. Firstly, because the mock interviews really helped me as like the advisors would replicate a real life like actual interview setting. So I used to book a lot of mock interviews with the Career Management services. Both Daryl and Calvin would help me like furnish better the answers and also provide me feedback on the areas that I could improve on. Then since the mock interviews were over Zoom, so I could look at the recordings over and over again and find areas that I could improve on and like even analyze my mistakes. Also, since my actual interview was over Zoom, I had the chance and the opportunity to prepare notes for the most generic answers that are usually asked in the interview. So I prepared my notes and I placed it in front of my laptop. So if by any chance the question had come up, I would just take a skim through the notes and I had a better idea to answer it. So mainly have like jotted down like bullet points of like the answers that I'm going to state out. And that helped me in the actual interview setting. So I would personally recommend all the participants who are participating in this event to use the services at Career Management at CMC. And it's just going to help you, and practice just makes you better. This is going to be my advice.
That's great, Navin. And I promised to our attendees that wasn't a plug for the Career Management Center, but it just so happened Navin used us and it worked really well. So I'm really glad that you elaborated on what you gained from that experience. And I really love that idea about recording yourself on Zoom and watching your behaviors, both your verbal, nonverbal communication. I'm old school. I talk about doing that in front of a mirror, but now we have the ability, the technology to you know, you don't have to assess yourself in real time as you're answering interview questions. Why not answer them and then assess your body language? In the past also, you know, people would use their phones to record themselves and listen to their voice, but now, you know, we can again also see how we look and how we're reacting. So really, really cool advice, and haven't tried it myself, but it's something I will now try down the road. That's awesome.
Because since right now as we're in the pandemic, most of the interviews are going online as well. So if you're practicing with the CMC over Zoom, that's going to be the best estimate to do it in an actual interview setting as well. So that really helped for me.
Very, very true. Yeah, exactly, for this time. And that likely won't change even when we get back to a world where we aren't all remote. Interviewing has been before virtual and will probably continue to be in a lot of ways. So yeah, great. Thank you. Rob, you're up next. So in order to secure an interview with MuleSoft, what kind of networking strategy did you put into practice, including what you attended and the coffee chats you engaged in?
Yeah, great question. So I guess when I was originally looking for jobs, I was more focused on quantity versus the quality of my applications. And that certainly works to an extent if you have a strong resume that'll get you in a lot of doors. But I found more success in moving along the interview process with having a little bit more of a tailored approach. So I have 3 tips that I can share that I used to apply to get my job now. The first one is I stopped applying to jobs unless I had some sort of with someone on LinkedIn or a friend that worked there, but usually it was just strangers. So when I found a job posting, I would find someone with the same title, go on LinkedIn and send them a LinkedIn connection request. And I can tell you, or I can send over what I would include on the note for that, because you can include like 3 sentences. But it was essentially like, hi, Chris, hope you're having a great week. Found you through LinkedIn and wanted to reach out as I'm going to apply to this company for this position. Would love to connect and hear about your experiences and hear about what skills are needed. Something along those lines. I'm more than happy to share if you have me on LinkedIn what I was sending out. But I think what matters more in that first message is just kind of your tone. I'd use a couple exclamation marks in there and just seem like an enthusiastic type of person. So that's kind of my first tip is I try to get some sort of informational kind of coffee chat before applying to a job because often you'll find it leads to referrals or your name thrown around internally without you even knowing it. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second tip that I have is that once you're able to get those coffee chats or informational type of interviews, something you probably don't hear, I guess, very often or might not read anywhere, is I was overly gracious in the first 30 to 45 seconds of that call and the very end of that call. So I would take the time to not just say, thanks for taking the time to chat with me. I would go to a much further extent being like, I know you're busy. I really appreciate this. I think you'll find that takes, or that's well received by whoever you're talking to, especially because they're a stranger and they definitely are busy with other things. So I would definitely use that. And then the last thing I'll say, so tip number 3, obviously come prepared with some questions into those types of chats. But I think active listening is more important and building your questions off of what they're actually talking about. Usually when you ask people about their jobs, they'll go on and talk about it forever. So you can always find like a little snippet in there to add in some more custom tailored questions to what they're actually talking about. So those are my 3 kind of tips. And I guess the last thing I would just say is you'd be amazed at how willing strangers are to help you out if you're nice to them. That has definitely taken me a long way in searching for jobs.
Rob, I think we need to offer you a job at the CMC. That's great. These are the same tips we offer our students. And it's so nice to hear, you know, when you put these actions into action, that you can actually receive such positive results. And I really, really appreciated, I mean, all of the tips are fantastic. And I really appreciate that first one that you started with, which was to really try to find a connection with that organization or company through an individual, you know, through a human being, especially nowadays where everything is, you know, virtual. There's a lot of applicant tracking systems. We really don't know where our resumes and cover letters are always going, which hands they're getting into when we apply to opportunities. So having that human connection, I think, is so important. Not only to find opportunities and be more successful, but also a way for you to learn whether it's the right fit for you. And definitely, you know, something I think we'll probably talk about as a panel further on tonight, but that was great. Those tips were fantastic.
Yeah, and people are so willing to help, I think, is what you'll find. Most people get to their position because they had someone help them get there.
That's true. And really, I mean, some people may forget that, and unfortunately that's the case, but most people do not forget that. Most people, I definitely agree with you. I think it makes such an impact on people's careers and their lives and their confidence that they want to pay it forward most of the time. So definitely. Really, really great feedback. Yeah. Okay, Gayle, you're up. So I have a question for you around how you leverage your role working as a student staff in SFU's co-op department, which you mentioned briefly in your bio, to build your network in your desired industry. And I also have a follow-up question. Maybe I'll just ask this now and you can sort of jump in after. So as a follow-up question, how did you create these lucrative introductions for yourself with industry contacts, especially during the pandemic?
Yeah, great question. You know, back when I was in university and whenever the thought of networking came to my mind, the first thing that usually came to my mind was collecting all the connections I could. So whenever I'd go to networking events, the goal was to get as many new LinkedIn connections by the end of the night. And to be honest, like, it's great when you have a lot of LinkedIn connections, but what's more important are the quality of your connections. So rather than focusing on, you know, how many connections you had, what I focused on instead was cultivating genuine relationships with the people in my network. So particularly when I was working with SFU's co-op department, I was working as the HR and marketing assistant, which meant that I had access to all of our co-op employers because I was their first point of contact for posting jobs, scheduling interviews, and presenting job offers. So what I would do is, you know, just provide excellent customer service, build that positive relationship with them throughout the recruitment process. And once we had wrapped up the recruitment process, I would just send them a LinkedIn connection, you know, just saying, you know, it was a pleasure to work with you. I hope we can stay connected in the future. And that kind of paid off in the end because when I was applying for another co-op job, the employer was someone I had worked with before. We were already connected on LinkedIn. And so when I applied, she actually emailed me and said, I recognized you immediately from, you know, working with you in the past. But, you know, in addition to kind of connecting with employers in my role, another thing people should consider if you are a student staff at SFU is also focusing on connecting with all the other SFU staff. So between co-op jobs, because, you know, during my co-op role, I got to know people from other departments and from, you know, other areas of SFU. Between co-op jobs, they would actually ask me to work part-time for them and offer me a temp job just so I had, you know, a little pocket money in between semesters. So I worked for a bit with the health sciences co-op department. I worked at SFU events and I helped them out with convocation. So yeah, kind of those two ways were how I leveraged my role was with, you know, connecting with employers and connecting with SFU staff. And in regards to your follow-up connection about, you know, how do I build introductions, it really went back to cultivating those genuine relationships. So how I got to my role now was, so the CMC manager, Daryl, was a mutual contact of ours, and she knew the hiring manager for this role, so she connected us. And so, you know, had I not had this relationship with Daryl, who knows if I would have gotten this job right before the pandemic hit.
You know, Gayle, that's such an interesting point, and I think so valuable, and I think builds on what Rob was saying about LinkedIn and building those connections. I think, first of all, I always say, if you don't reach out, it's a definite no, right? And we never know how we're going to connect with others and how relationships will evolve. But, you know, you've got to just make the effort, right, initially to reach out and see where it goes and be genuine and have a nice way of introducing yourself. And that other piece, Gayle, you mentioned, which is, you know, everyone around you could potentially be a connection to something great. I mean, they already probably offer wonderful things to you in your life. I'm thinking, you know, your peers, your professors, the staff that you mentioned you work with. But sometimes, you know, the greatest connections are right in front of us, or potential future connections from those people right in front of us. And we don't always see that. So, you know, it's something I've had to learn in my life with networking, and something I also share with the students we advise as career advisors. And it sounds like with Gayle, your example of, you know, our colleague Daryl being that advocate for you and being able to connect you to an employer, and through word of mouth and referencing and all of that, it was a great opportunity for yourself, and landed you, not the only reason, but one of the ways that landed you in this job. So I think it's really important to keep in mind just who's next to you, you know, who's here tonight on this panel, who's logged into this session, right? And can you connect with them and see if there's a match, you know, right? And a way to move forward with that. Great. Excellent. Thank you. Jasdeep, I have my next question for you. So you were successful in converting your co-op role at P&G, Procter & Gamble, into a full-time position, which is fantastic. While in your co-op role, what did you focus on, such as maybe networking, personal branding, or something else, to demonstrate your value to your team so that you could be considered for a full-time opportunity?
So I think for me, it started out by trying to understand Procter & Gamble's values, because for them, that was very, very important. It's something that's on their website. It's repeated to you throughout the recruitment process and even throughout full-time career now. So understanding what the company values and what they look for in their people is key. Because oftentimes you'll find that if your own values don't align with that, the relationship's not going to last very long. So for me, it was really knowing what they stand for and being able to align with that. That really helped me out. And it was very natural after that, because I was somebody who came into the role with very little hard skills that were required for the job. So when it came to, you know, data analytics, and presentations to like buyers that were very data heavy, I had never touched that type of work before. That's not where what I thought my expertise were at. So it was very intimidating for me coming in. But what I learned very quickly was that Procter & Gamble, they value the person and the effort and the work ethic you bring rather than the exact hard skills, because they know they can develop anyone to whatever skills that they need you to have, right, for your role. So that's where it got very clear to me that my performance was based on my effort, my willingness to learn, and me going out there every day and knowing that I might fail, but it wasn't a matter of checking all the boxes and getting everything right. It was me willing to work on my personal development in that role and committed to the company's values as well. So I think it's really, really important as you go in, whether it's in an internship or a new role, to speak with your manager or your lead team and say, what do you expect out of your people? You know, what do you need me to bring to this role every day? And to show up with that, because I think that's a great starting place. And then after that, you can, as you get more experience, really learn what the company is like and what's required of you in your role.
You raise such a valuable point, and it is about value, right? It is really about not always needing or having immediately every skill that is required for the job, right? And especially if you're a co-op student, there's an expectation that you won't know everything. You know, you are going in to learn and to develop your skills. And so what I really love that you said is that you really understood the value of the company. You understood why they existed, why they've been so successful in their industry for so many years. And so it sounds like you moved beyond the role itself that you were working in to understand the greater value that you brought to the team and what that could look like in the future, and how that was aligned with who you are as a professional and your values. And the other piece I really appreciated that you said is, you know, these early career opportunities, which may be, you know, the beginning of a future career that's amazing, or you may transition into something else eventually, but really it's an opportunity for you to learn what you like and what you don't like, and whether you align with certain industries and companies in terms of the values and the people. And that's just as important as whether they want you, right? Because it is a give and take, and we're spending so many hours of our lives in a profession. So I think that's really valuable learning from both sides. So thank you. Yeah. Okay, Alex, Alex, how did the pandemic affect your employment opportunities? What challenges did you face? And how did you plan for success in achieving your role at SAP during this time?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So for me, the pandemic greatly affected my employment opportunities. So going back to the beginning of 2020, I was actually laid off an 8-month data analyst internship at Traction on Demand in April. My plan was to do that, and then I had 3 more courses left. So I ended up taking 2 courses in the summer, and then I had 1 course left in the fall for grad. So I began my job search in the months leading up to the fall semester, actually. And it continued all the way until October or November, I think. During this period, it was pretty tough to stay motivated about my career prospects and my plan for success. I felt like it kind of got thrown off, my plan for the year there. I'm sure everyone's plans were thrown off to some extent. But so through the 3 to 5 months, I'd probably applied to around 15 to 20 positions. I only landed a few interviews. So that being said, having gone through that, I would preach kind of 3 things that helped me: patience, preparation, and forgiveness. To illustrate those points, I'll talk about how I got the role at SAP. So sometimes to get the position that you want, you kind of need a number of things to fall in place. So after being rejected numerous times, I applied for the project support engineer role at SAP, and on a bit of a whim, they called me back for a technical interview, but I felt that the job description was looking more so towards someone with a background in computer science. I was a little bit surprised. So from that point, since it was a technical interview, I only had a few days to prep. And I actually knew a previous intern who worked with me at Traction on Demand, who worked in a similar role at SAP. And I was kind of doing something similar to Robert. I was kind of looking up people who are in product support engineering, seeing what it's about. Robert actually knows the person, reached out to, because he also worked at Traction. Robert worked at Traction as well. Yeah, so I didn't know him personally, but I leveraged that mutual connection, reached out to him on Facebook. It turns out that although he was on a different product team, he just gave me a few pieces of advice anyways. He just said, you know, you should really look at Linux bash commands, and maybe they asked me about that, and then we just talked about the role for a bit. And actually, so then I didn't really ask him like exactly what that meant because I didn't even know. So I took that Linux bash commands. I messaged my friend who's in computer science. I said, you know, what's Linux bash commands all about? I kind of need to know this for my interview in 2 days. And they sent me like a list, website that's like 30 basic Linux commands. I just went on my computer and practiced them. And they're pretty straightforward, and like I understood what they did. And then it turns out on the day of the technical interview, like eight or 10 of the first questions of the technical interview, she just fired off those Linux bash commands. And like, what does this do? What does that do? What does this do? So from there, I nailed the second behavioral. There's 2 interviews. I nailed the second behavioral interview, and I got the position. So my takeaway from that isn't that you need a mutual connection necessarily give you an inside scoop for the role. Of course, as Robert was saying, it definitely helps. It helps a lot. I'll probably touch on that a bit later in my answer here, but sometimes you need a combination of a few ingredients to get the role that you want. So I was ejected from SAP numerous times, and it was a combination of the patience, preparation, and honestly a bit of luck that allowed me to get in that role. So this goes into my last kind of thing that I talked about, which is forgiveness. So if you feel that you didn't prepare enough and you feel at fault when the rejection letters are piling up, just remember to forgive yourself, because job searching is very difficult. It's very grueling, and the pandemic has intensified this tenfold. You're going to have some regrets probably and thoughts about what you could have done differently or better during interviews, during cover letters. But there's a lot of factors in place in landing positions. I'm sure there was someone else that had much more technical knowledge than me, or maybe they missed 1 or 2 of the Linux bash commands because they didn't know to look up that list. It could be something arbitrary, but try not to beat yourself up over anything like that. Just to touch on Robert's point, I think just to add on that, I think if you can, I totally agree with him. If that's something you're comfortable with, I feel like that's a really good thing to maybe get. So it's all about like those 3 combinations, right? Luck, preparation, patience. If you want to increase your luck a bit, give yourself a better chance, I think that'd be something I'd look into doing. And I think everyone will be able to find success on their own timeline. So be easy on yourself.
You know, I almost feel like this needs to be our new sort of slogan. I love this. It was what? Patience, preparation, and forgiveness. And actually, Alex, what is really cool is that there has been a lot of research and work done on resilience, and some of you may have seen this or heard of it, in terms of professionals being resilient during this time. Well, not just professionals, anyone in general, parents, you know, healthcare workers, students, professionals, all of us. But the idea of resilience, I feel, is really much tied to forgiveness, and it's that sense of how do you overcome those times where you feel there's rejection? How do you wake up every morning and realize part of your day is about your job search? You know, how do you maintain network connections and friendships and relationships when you might be feeling down and feeling, I don't want to say the word betrayed, but I went through a process of feeling somewhat betrayed because of COVID and the labor market being a certain way, and making my job harder, making my life harder, and you feel it's like an injustice, like you didn't bring this onto your life, it wasn't something you asked for, and so I love that idea of forgiving yourself, having self-compassion. I think that's very much a key part of mental health and well-being. And then also, be what comes from that and from all of those pieces you're speaking to, from what I see as a holistic perspective, is being resilient and really, continuing the process as hard as it is. And the other piece I really like that you stated, I wanted to reiterate, is upskilling. So that is a huge part of being a professional throughout your life, and it never ends. And I think our generation and your generation is much more aware of that. We're told in university, this is not the end. You don't do a 4-year degree and then everything from now on, which might have been different back in the day. Now it's that you go back to school and you might do graduate training or a post-grad certificate, or you skill yourself like you did. You have 2 days and you learn a software, you learn a technology. And like Jasdeep said, you don't need to know everything going into a job, but you do need to show that you have that initiative and that incentive and that resilience to stay up to date, to know what is needed and to show it. So I think that that's a really, really great piece that you shared with us. Thank you. So everyone remember that. Patience, wait, what was it? Sorry, patience, what was it? Alex, say it again. I know. Preparation and forgiveness. Okay, yes, those are great. Okay, I'm going to keep that in mind. Well, you know what? I almost feel, and we're not going to, I feel like we can end here because you have answered these questions beautifully. You've given a lot of wonderful information, and so I'm really impressed so far. It's been fantastic. I'm noticing some questions are coming in the Q&A box, which look great too from our attendees. So I'm really happy that people are listening in and are picking up on pieces and wanting more information when we get to that point. But before we do so, I would love to go through our next set of questions, and we're doing really well with time. So I'm going to go in the same order I did the last time, if that's okay with everyone. And Navin, my second question for you, how did you handle yourself professionally in your interview with Colliers? Can you speak to both the verbal and nonverbal cues you use to be professional in your virtual interview environment? And I guess this sort of follows up to my first question, which you answered about recording yourself and watching yourself. So I don't know if there are pieces that you brought into the actual interview, but we'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, sure. Great question, by the way. So one thing that I've observed, like by giving interviews, is that the employer really likes when you take the effort to dress up. So so I would recommend people to like dress up, wear a blazer, a good tie, and even a pocket square if you have one. So my current employer really loved that I took in the effort of dressing up, which showed that I was professional. Because as I said, first impressions really matter when you're going to interviews, and this was the only chance that I could impress my current employer. Also, the actual interview was at around at 5 p.m., which was after work time. So I knew that I had the opportunity to get to know my hiring manager more. So I decided to ask some small talk questions, basically ask him how was his day, because that was a busy time of the year. Also ask him about his hobbies, and through which we connected really well. We basically spoke about 10 minutes about a fascination for movies and even Star Wars. So that was pretty good. And at the end of the interview, I also made sure that I sent him a LinkedIn email thanking him for the interview. So that was another opportunity where I could get to know my current manager more. So we really went off topic and talked about the fascination for movies and more about the role, which I could not speak in the specific time frame of the interview. So that really helped. And finally, some nonverbal cues that helped me during the actual interviews were like active listening and even maintaining a smile during the interview. That radiated confidence and showed that showcase that I'm ready to learn and develop more. So that was really important during the interview, and these were some tips that I would share with the attendees.
Navin, when you mentioned Star Wars, it made me laugh because I named my dog Kylo after Kylo Ren. And so I was thinking if that type of conversation came up, I probably as a post-interview thank you, I would probably share a picture of the dog if I had mentioned it in the interview and if that panelist was receptive. So it just goes to show that there's so many different ways we can connect, right, with each other. And especially in a professional and environment where there is a bit of a power dynamic, you're the one seeking employment, they're the one potentially offering it to you. We can forget that we have, again, that human connection that's required. And I always think to myself, someone raised this to me years ago, they said, when you think of hiring someone or if someone's thinking about hiring you, they are also thinking, do they want to sit in the office with you for 40 hours a week? Will you run out of things to talk about? Will they come home and be energized by the experience or come home and think, oh, do I want to go back to work tomorrow? Which we hope never is the case. But I think that speaks to what you're saying, that you have other interests in areas that you could potentially build and develop with colleagues than only the professional, which is really, really great. Excellent.
Very important to make that personal connection, and that's the reason I guess I was hired, because I was able to connect well with my current manager. So yeah.
Great. Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, it's there's and like Alex said, there's always multiple factors involved here, right? And so this is one other piece of that puzzle or one of those factors. Great. Rob, okay, so what takeaways from your coffee chats during the pandemic did you use to prepare for your job interview? How did you incorporate these into the interview?
Yeah, that's another good question. I guess there's two things that I sort of did with my informational interviews. I had met with about 4 people for this role and had a really good idea about what the role was. And because of that, I had a really good understanding of the experience or the things that I lacked that were needed for the role. So I needed to understand how I was going to objection handle that when they would inevitably ask about those things. So I was prepared for that. I knew when they asked me, Rob, tell me about a time that you delivered on a sales quota. I knew how to spin that and say, well, I haven't actually had a quota, but I have done this and this and this. And that sets me up well to perform on this quota. So I think that's a big thing. A lot of things in job descriptions are suggestions, I would say, and they aren't, requirements. And there's definitely opportunity to show why that doesn't matter and why you'll be able to deliver on those going forward. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I did was I name drop people in my interviews. So a very common interview question is like, why should we pick you over other candidates? And I would be like, well, Bob, I think that I'm really good at this, this, and this. I know that I'm lacking in my Excel skills, but over the last few weeks, I chatted with Chris, Sam, and Jeff out in the Toronto office, and I have a really good understanding of the things that I need to learn. And in fact, I've already started watching YouTube videos on Excel functions. So I think that's a big thing. Name dropping is great if you've had conversations with people and they've gone well. Just say that you've done it. It definitely shows that you're willing to take initiative. And even if they don't ask that question about like the why you question, you can say that anyways. I think interviews are largely about selling yourself. So I would say have something prepped in the last minute to say about why you deserve the job. And that's a great opportunity to name drop people you've talked to.
Oh my gosh, guys you're all offering such amazing advice. It's like I'm nodding nonstop. It's so, so true what you just said, Rob, about being able to circumvent those questions. It's often, we call it a weakness question or a challenge question or a hypothetical behavioral question where you may not have done it, engaged in it, or if you have and something hasn't worked out, to not focus on the negative, right? To move into the, this is what I learned from the experience, or this is who I've talked to, and now I understand where my gaps lie, and here's how I'm starting to upskill, like Alex was saying, I may have not done this before, but if I did do it based on what I know from the contacts I've talked to and the chats I've had, this is how I would approach it. And that really goes miles for an employer. It really does. And I've seen that so many times, and it just does go to show that you don't need to meet every qualification and requirement on a job posting. That is their perfect, sort of unicorn out in the universe. They know they're likely not going to get that, but they want to know that people are willing to learn and are able to skill up quickly and have talked to the right people about it. So fantastic. But you said a phrase in there that I cannot remember. If it comes back to you, please let me know. It was sort of addressed to that first part of your statement about making sure you answer questions with the positive or the hypothetical approach. But I should have jotted it down, but I'll watch the recording and I'll catch it after. Okay, thanks, Rob. That's great. Gayle. Okay, Gayle. So how did you incorporate your educational work experience into your professional brand so that it was relevant to Eminence Skincare, a company you wanted to work for?
Yeah, so when I graduated from SFU, I had concentrated in human resources and marketing, and all of my past co-op jobs also involved HR and marketing. So I definitely used those two things to my advantage. On the HR side, when I was working for the co-op department and when I was working at Hatch, I did a lot of recruitment. Particularly at Hatch, I hired all the co-op students and I hired all our new grads, which meant that I had a pretty good idea of what the job market looked like. I had a pretty good idea of what a good resume looked like and what a competitive cover letter looked like. And so, I kind of identified what competitive skills the top candidates had and made sure that I acquired those skills as well. And I looked at what experiences the top candidates had and made sure that I had something similar or relevant to that. And from, a recruiter's perspective, I found what really is important is how well people tailor their resume to the role. So when you're looking at hundreds of resumes, I don't even want to think about it. Like when I see your resume, I want you to make it absolutely obvious how you're perfect for this role. And one trick I do is I actually take terms directly out of the job description and incorporate that into my resume and my cover letter. So if, they were looking for someone who had coordinated learning and development events, I would kind of sneak that into my resume and cover letter as well. And I think what successful candidates did as well was identifying what the company needed, how that related to their past experience, and then, showing the employer what they can do for them in the future by combining those two things. From my marketing side and from my marketing experiences, for Eminence Organic Skincare, I had a look at their Instagram, on their website to kind of get a feel for what their company branding was. And I tried to design my resume to reflect that branding as well. So kind of having a more modern and polished design to match the company's branding. And a tip for you guys is check out canva.com. They have a bunch of free resume templates there that are very modern and up to date that you can kind of just pick from. And another thing that was also super helpful was, so for in this role in particular, the assistant would be involved in creating company-wide communications. So I actually put together a portfolio of all the infographics, the posters, some of the communications I had done for past roles and brought that to my interview. I didn't think it would, be a big deal, but I thought, well, why not? And it actually ended up working in my favor. And they said that actually was one of the things that set me apart during the recruitment process. And now I've kind of become the default marketing person for the people and culture team. So whenever they want any communications, they're like, hey, Gayle, can you make an infographic for us? So you never know what skills you have that you may not think are relevant to the role, but turns out, you can kind of capitalize on and just revamp what the company's doing.
Oh, Gayle, I totally love what you just shared with us about that, because isn't that so true? I don't know for the rest of the panelists, but I think we've probably all had life experiences where we've taken on a job and we've been given additional responsibilities because we have extra talents that may not have necessarily been part of the job posting or the hiring process, but have been recognized, and why not be used? And if the employee is interested in building that skill set and that niche in their portfolio, then it's a win-win for both. And I think, you know, what you said about, and what I really like that you did is you took us back before the interview to the resume, which I think is so important, right? Because that really is your ticket into the interview, in addition to information chats and other approaches that you take. But really what you have on paper is what you really can work with to sort of catch the attention of your employers, and so, or potential employers. And so that piece about taking that extra step to build a portfolio, even if you don't know if it's going to work, you know, again, it's sort of that mentality, if you don't do it, it's not going to be seen, or if you don't do it, it's always a no. But if you do it, it may just fall into the right hands and be part of that portfolio that really adds to your to how you're desirable to them. So I thought that was fantastic. You may have seen my dog jump up and down. He tends to join after a while if I'm distracted on a chat. Thanks, Gayle. Jasdeep. Okay, so what are your top tips for effectively speaking to your brand in an interview and communicating your alignment? So things like skills, education, or experience with not only the position that you're obtaining, but also the industry trends that may be shifting due to a pandemic.
I guess I'll start off with how I defined my brand. So for me, my brand was directly a reflection of my values. It's what I believe about myself and what I want others to see about me. And I thought the best way to reflect that is by showing what I dedicate my time to. So whatever I'm putting my time into must be important to me. And that's what I highlighted on my resume is, outside of school, what is it that I spend my time doing, whether that was student clubs or volunteering or working on some causes that were important to me. So I made a plan to highlight that in my resume. Just as you mentioned, your resume is the one piece of paper that they get to see. And it's really taking the opportunity to say, well, what do you want to communicate to whoever's reading this resume? What do you want them to know about you? And it's your values. And the way you express that is, well, I've dedicated my time and my effort into these extracurriculars and roles, and this is what I want you to know about me. So that's what I did in terms of coming into the interview. And as I mentioned before, I was well aware that I didn't have like the Excel and the data skills going in, but I did have a bit of an in, as a lot of everybody else has been mentioning. That in really helped me because he was somebody who had previously interviewed for P&G. And I wasn't aware of this, but P&G is known to have a very standard interview process because there's so many applicants every year. So it's a 1-hour behavioral interview. So it's really not about your hard skills as much as it's about how do you make decisions, how do you react in stressful situations and things like that. So I remember before, there's 2 interviews, they're exactly the same. So before each of them, I sat down with a piece of paper and I said, well, what have been some pivotal moments for me in my academic career, in my professional experiences that have expressed my values or displayed my character and that I would want to bring up as examples. So I wrote a list of those and that really helped me. And I think it'll help anyone going into behavioral interview because oftentimes under pressure, you forget about really important things that you've gone through and really, you know, important decisions you've made just under that pressure. So really sit down and remind yourself of, you know, I was in this one retail role maybe, and this happened, and this is how I reacted. And why would you want to tell that to the person interviewing you? So really write that process down because it's easier to remember in the interview.
Yeah, you know, that piece on personal branding, and this is really fantastic what you noted, that I think a lot of times people get concerned or maybe hung up on the idea that their brand has to totally be about their professional accomplishments. And really from what you're saying, and I absolutely agree with you, is that it's not just about professional accomplishments, or sometimes it's not at all about that. It's actually about who you are as an individual. What are your values? What is your character? How do you govern yourself in this world? And how do you demonstrate that through action, right? So it's one thing to say, you know, I value whatever that might be, but it's another to show I've actually done this or spoken to or appreciated those values by taking action. And I think like you said, I think it also goes back a bit to that human nature piece. People can very much relate and pick up on that, especially if they share those similar values and traits, or they're looking for that on their team. And one piece that I think we all have to keep in mind here is that more and more, what I've noticed is companies and employers are looking at personality traits of and assessing their team members to sort of understand who have they brought on, how do these people think, how do they act, what are their values, all of those things, their strengths. You know, we talk about leading by your strengths in a company or an industry, and what is needed to be added. And I have definitely seen employers decide on candidates or between two candidates because they think one team member will bring in an additional personality trait or add to the team in a way that maybe isn't there yet. So I think that also really speaks to identifying that in your brand ahead of time is fantastic, because you're already telling them right off the bat, this is who I am. And if they're looking for that in their team, they're going to come to an interview being excited about you. So awesome. Okay, Alex, this is the final question of our round robin. So last but certainly not least, okay. What part of your personal brand do you think was most attractive to SAP and why?
Yeah, so for me, I think with personal branding, I personally thought, I don't know if this is the same for a lot of students, but I thought like digital channels like LinkedIn and making sure your social media is all like clean and stuff. That's what I thought it was. But I think it goes beyond social media platforms, LinkedIn, or even how you dress to interviews. That's all part of it, but I think it just goes beyond that. So for me, it starts when I kind of begin to understand the value of my skills and experiences and how that applies to whatever position I'm applying for. So I think of every cover letter as a personal branding assignment. And they're usually all different in some way. So whoever you are, whether you're like a captain of JDC West team, or maybe you opted not to join any clubs at your time in Beedie, you possess your own experience and knowledge that is, unique to you. And I think because your experience is unique to you, I think a lot of times when you're being evaluated as part of a recruitment process, it's easy to assume that maybe you didn't get the interview simply because you didn't check the boxes or your experience wasn't good enough. But I think a lot of the times the reality is that these rejections are not always related to your own personal knowledge or experience being limited, but more so about how you're able to present those experiences to the employer in the context of the role you're looking to fill. So this totally ties into everything that Gayle was saying about tailoring your applications. So for my recruitment into SAP, I can tell you that I thought the role I was applying for was going to be very technical. But when I got into like the last 20 minutes of my second interview, it turned out that the reason why the manager kind of had confidence that I could excel in the role is because I had a little bit of tech experience, enough to like probably be okay in the role. But he was actually looking for more of that client work. When I did employee relations and event coordinator at SFU, Career Volunteer Services, that kind of helped me. So with that, so with that being said, my advice would be, to be open to new opportunities. If you don't see a clear path in the opportunity you're looking at to where you want to be in 5 to 10 years, it's just really surprising how you can take different pieces of experience and connect them together to build kind of like a personal brand that's appealing to employers. To touch on Robert's point, you can always fill any missing gaps by doing quick things to show initiative. So that's kind of how I understand and apply personal branding in a way that makes sense to me. And I think that doing that adds to your confidence and excitement when applying for positions. So to cap this off, I'm going to quote my LinkedIn bio. And this took me a few years to draft in Beedie because I could never really think of a way to describe all my experiences for the last 3 to 4 years in one short paragraph. It seemed like a weird concept. This is what I came up with. I said, having a background in marketing, data analytics, information systems allows me to look at issues in different ways, whether it be building a consumer journey and analyzing how they interact with the system or product, or using a large data set to perform statistical analysis to build applicable insights. So here my personal branding is attempting to market me as someone who has a great combination of kind of the softer communication skills, but also the necessary technical skills to get the job done at the end of the day. So that's an example of how I've kind of looked at my experience and I've kind of looked at job descriptions and thought about, what can I was applying to a lot of the roles like that kind of felt that would be kind of like a right fit. So that's how I kind of tailored my whole application. Just to add on to that, I usually put a bit more emphasis on the design. I'll look at my resume and cover letter and just try to make sure you have consistent messaging anywhere that the employer would look. So LinkedIn, resume, cover letter. And yeah, the more time you put into this aspect of branding and portfolio building, I think it really helps with your confidence when you're applying for jobs.
Alex, first of all, I really want to commend you for thinking of a cover letter, or every cover letter you write, as a personal branding activity. I just want to emphasize that wholeheartedly. Let's all try to do that, because cover letters are not easy to write, and they can get frustrating, and it's easy to want to send the same draft or version out to 10 different companies when you're applying to a bunch of different jobs. And I think that goes back to your piece on having patience and really thinking about what is it I need to articulate to each of these employers. And I think that piece on, if you think of it more like a personal branding activity, it might be a little more interesting to tackle that type of document than thinking, oh, I have to write another cover letter for a job. And that other piece of you sharing your LinkedIn statement, I thought that was fantastic. And I love your positivity around the fact that we do bring so many different experiences to the table. Our careers and our lives are not linear by any means. That's becoming more and more so for every generation now that goes through an undergraduate degree and has various life experiences. So the idea of not thinking about that in the negative, thinking about that as opportunity, as strengths that you're bringing to a job, that you become a more well-rounded professional and person because of those various experiences, as opposed to the idea, well, you didn't stick on one path and you didn't check all the marks on that one path, so therefore you are not as good as someone, you know, who did that. And very rarely does a candidate have all of those marks anyway, right? So it's really how you verbalize and communicate those various life experiences and bring them into a package, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, this has been fantastic. I would just love to keep asking you my questions because you are all so insightful and I'm really enjoying this. But I do have to be mindful. We have some great questions being brought up from the attendees, and we actually have 8. So I just want to thank all of you for offering your questions. We will try to get through each of these, but I'm going to go by the questions that were upvoted the most because I feel that may mean more people in the audience have these types of questions. So we have a question from actually one of our career launch participants, Nick. And Nick has asked, and this is open to anyone, so any of the panelists feel free to take turns responding, or maybe some if you would like to, some not. But the question is, how do you manage to maintain genuine relationships with your network through time when your network becomes too big? Do you maintain those relationships now that you are working professionals? Anyone want to tackle that in terms of maintaining the relationships? Building them is one thing, maintaining is another. And also, Nick makes a good point. Now that you're working, do you feel you need to keep maintaining them? And how do you keep maintaining them?
I can jump in here. So in terms of maintaining relationships while you're working, one easy way is to just engage with them on LinkedIn. So if they're, want to post frequently on LinkedIn or ask for suggestions, just reply, like their post, comment. Mm-hmm. Another thing I would do is, if I remember there was a topic that my, network was interested in. So for example, for Daryl, actually, I remember when I worked with her, she was doing a project on Gen Z. So when I was already working, I came across a webinar about Gen Z. I just said, hey, Daryl, I remember that you were into this. So I just thought, I wanted to share, hope you're doing well, and just kind of like quick little connections like that. And if you are particularly close with that person, I still go out for lunch and for coffee with some of my past coworkers, and it's a great way to catch up. And not only that, but also exchange information. So when I was working at Hatch, I went out for lunch with a coworker who was a career advisor, and she was asking me for tips on, what do good candidates look like? What do successful grads look like? So, there's something in it for you, but there's also something in it for them. It's beneficial for the both of you.
Would anyone else like to jump in there? That was excellent, Gayle. That was great. I love that idea of networking being a give and take. That you and especially as a working professional now, you also have expertise and areas of development. Not that you didn't before, but you have even more that you could share with your network, like you said.
I just wanted to add on to Gayle's point. So sometimes sometimes if you really know a connection really well, I would just go, LinkedIn gives you like notifications about birthday messages. So I would send them happy birthdays, like just wishing them and just talking more like how you've been since the past 1 year and getting to know what the journey has been since like the time that you've not spoken. So yeah.
I love that, bringing it back to the personal, right? Which is just fantastic. And if people are sharing that information, you know, in their social media portfolios, there's probably a reason why. They want people to know, they'd like to celebrate. It's nice to be recognized. I think that's great. Any other thoughts on maintaining and keeping relationships going? Okay, so we will move to the next question. Thank you both, Gayle and Navin. Those were excellent tips. So this is a question for Jasdeep. It's from one of the attendees. As someone who did not have the hard skills at the time of application, how were you able to relate to the job posting to get past the application and interview process? Great question.
Okay, well, I read the job description for the sales internship that I'm in, and I also applied for a brand role. I knew that I didn't have everything both of the descriptions asked for, but I didn't want that to be a barrier, and I don't think you should let that ever be a barrier to applying to a job. So just as I was mentioning before, there will never be a perfect candidate for any role, and you don't really know what the perfect candidate looks like if you're not in the hiring manager's position, right? So I would always say just go on a limb, and if you like a job posting, just apply for it, because if you get a chance to meet for that interview face-to-face, you can express that why you're interested in this job and what you're going to do in order to develop the skills that they're looking for. Because I think there a lot goes into the perfect candidate or a good fit for a role, and hard skills is only a couple ways of describing what you might need to be successful in that role. There's a whole lot more that goes into it. So never let that be kind of like a discouraging factor of applying to a role.
Excellent. I love that. And I just want to reiterate how positive you all are about not necessarily being or ever anyone being the perfect candidate, but finding strategies, finding positive ways and resilient ways. If we go back to, you know, what Alex brought to our attention, to maintain that motivation and to show your value. I mean, that's really the way to do it, right? Because there's always going to be potentially something that you have to learn, you have to build. That's just the way life is. And we know, especially in Canada, actually, research has shown that Canadians especially are constantly going back and doing further education, constantly upskilling. It's really actually just part of our professional platform. It's not the only place in the world that is like that, but it truly is part of how Canadians evolve professionally, right? So you can never know everything all the time, right? So you have to leverage those other qualities that you have. Excellent. Okay. How to deal with interview anxiety? Great question. I often do mock interviews and self-preparation before any interview, but when it comes to meeting with the interview virtually, my mind goes blank. So any tips on how to deal with interview anxiety?
I can answer that my best I can. That's a challenging one, something that I've experienced with. Just your mind blanking, and you just kind of feel a lot of pressure. It's great that you're doing. It's great to do the mock interviews and the preparation stuff. So that's the first step you've taken, and I think now the next step would be to understand that it's something that it happens. It's normal, and it's also not always like a you thing. I've been in interviews where I felt very uneasy and kind of nervous, and then upon reflection, after I went through like 5, 6, or 7 more interviews, I was like, hey, like actually that interview was actually like applying some pressure when they probably didn't need to. I've been in the kind of scenarios with that where they're asking kind of little off questions, or the interviews, for whatever reason, the interview, your process, your brain and their brain just aren't really connecting, and you're not really getting what they're saying, and they're not really getting what you're saying, and your anxiety just kind of goes up because you're like, I don't really know what I'm saying right now. But if you keep going, and it's going to be kind of painful, but if you keep going, you're going to get used to it more. And it reached the point where I was like really, really nervous. I remember first time I was looking at co-op, I did so many, messed up like at least 3 to 4 interviews, but now like I don't really get as nervous for interviews that much because I've been through a decent amount. And really, once you get to know like a lot of the HR reps, then you kind of know it's kind of this it becomes a more comfortable process. It's always going to be uncomfortable, especially virtual. That's another thing. Yeah, don't blame yourself because I think the virtual one's even harder. So yeah, I'd say that you're doing all the right steps. You just need to keep going to reach a point where it's coming natural to you, more or less than when you're thinking about it too much. Yeah, so that comes with doing.
Yeah, I've definitely been in a similar situation where, the minds are just not processing the same way in an interview, and it's so stressful because it is such a time constraining and sort of power dynamic environment. And sometimes, you walk away thinking you've done the worst job and you get a call back and they loved you, and other times you don't, right? So it's really hard to know if what you're experiencing is also what they're experiencing. Until if you get the job, you can sometimes laugh about it later or ask those questions down the road and say, what did you think how my interview went, right? But that is a really good point. It's not to walk away from those experiences, even if anxiety was part of the process, which it usually is for most people, and think that that was the only thing that was seen or that was taken away from the interviewer. And the interviewers know, they've been there before. We have to remember, they're, even if they have a really good poker face, they've gone through that life experience themselves. And so hopefully they have a bit of empathy and compassion, or forgiveness, right? And patience, as Alex said earlier, around that process. Any other thoughts around dealing with anxiety for interviewing? Any other tips?
What I found effective was keeping a glass of water by my side. So even if I got nervous or became blank, I would just take a moment and ask the interviewer can I take a moment and drink a glass of water? And even like taking a deep breath, just taking a pause and taking a deep breath, try to accumulate my thoughts together. That is something that I found effective to deal with when I'm going blank at the interview.
Yeah, Navin, that's a really good point. I've heard of that as a strategy. Also, sometimes being able to break eye contact helps as well. So similar to what you were saying, it's like incorporating an action that allows you to sort of become more mindful of the moment and not be caught up in maybe the hamster spinning in your head if you are going into kind of an anxious, I've definitely been there, or you're blanking. So another approach is, saying, could I write down a few pieces of the question you just asked me, and being able to kind of look away from the interviewer. And sometimes that also helps to ground you. And I think drinking a glass of water, taking a sip of water is excellent as well. There was a question actually just before that one that I had missed and it had been uploaded. So I definitely want to ask this one as well. It's for any of you on the panel, have you had experiences that were not so great during coffee chats? And what did you do about it? Has there been coffee chat experiences where the more you talked to the person, the more you felt like your values were not aligned? It's a great question. So what happens when you're trying to build that network, have those coffee chats, and maybe there's those awkward silences, or maybe they say something that you just don't jive with, or you say something and you think, oh, maybe that was the wrong thing to say, or the values just aren't in alignment. So any thoughts?
I could probably touch on that. Yeah, I don't think this has particularly happened to me where it's just gone like really poorly, but certainly when I was starting to do these, I was really nervous, like as nervous as going into an interview for the first time. Like I had a sheet of questions prepared, but you never really know how it's going to go. I would just say, take the pressure off yourself. You have really nothing to lose. Like I had some bad informational interviews for sure. And I was never going to get a referral or probably ever get that job, but it certainly helped me prepare for the information interviews that I did for this job. And I was much better at the way I presented myself and the questions that I asked. So I wouldn't worry about that. It'll probably happen. But also likely that the strangers that are willing to talk to you are probably better people than the ones who just ignore you. So you're talking to the right people in general. And I never really asked, I have the sentence here. I never really asked to like talk at a specific time. I would say in my LinkedIn connection request, I'd love to connect and hear about your interview experience at MuleSoft and what skills/qualities are needed for this position. So they could have replied in a message if they wanted to. One person did. And a couple said, yeah, let's talk at this time. So you really kind of put the ball in their court, and you'll find the people willing to talk usually are happy to talk about themselves as long as you have questions ready.
I think that piece about having questions ready is so important. And like you said, it's just like an interview. You'll walk away from experiences where you think, oh, that maybe just didn't go well, or I'm not the right fit, or they probably wouldn't want to work with someone like me. You just never know. I sometimes think of it as dating. I know it's not the exact same realm, of course, but you have to think of it's personalities and clicking. Is there some chemistry there, professional chemistry, so to speak, right? And like you said, Rob, I think a nice rule of thumb is hopefully if they're willing to engage with you, they will be kind and they'll want to have a good conversation.
Definitely.
Other thoughts on that piece of networking? I know I was thinking Rob would be one of the best to answer because of so many coffee chats that he's done in the past. Okay, well, we have a few more minutes, so I have a few more questions here before we wrap up. And again, thank you to attendees. These are excellent, excellent questions, so really appreciate it. So another question I have here for panelists, have you had imposter syndrome when starting out, and how did you overcome it? And I'm sure we're all familiar with imposter syndrome, just in case not everyone in the audience is. It is the idea that you feel you aren't good enough or smart enough or capable enough to be chosen for the role, and it leads to thoughts of, why was I chosen, or I shouldn't have been chosen? And certainly, I think it stemmed historically, actually, from research, at least in part on graduate students who felt very much like they weren't good enough or smart enough and capable enough of writing, say, a master's thesis or dissertation. But imposter syndrome survives everywhere within us in many different ways. So in the professional world, how did you tackle that if you faced it? And any tips for dealing with that? It's a great question.
Yeah, I can kick off on that a little bit. Yeah, I'm dealing with it like right now in my role, and in my previous roles, it's always kind of there. So for reference, I'm working on an SAP product support team where it's a very complicated product, SAP HANA database, and a lot of the people on my team, even my last internship, a lot of people on my team have been at the company for 3-4 years, and my knowledge is not even comparable. And like, even probably coming in, my knowledge is a bit less. And yeah, but part of the thing we've been talking about today and kind of the points have been, what is job switching about, and what is like the career about? A career is something that's like, it's going to be changing, and it's going to be up and down. You're going to probably find yourselves in different roles. I think the average time people, I think probably Rebecca can correct me on this because she's the CMC person, but it's like 2 or 3 years rather than like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. You see people stay at a company for a long time. Just like, yeah, you're going to be in positions where you might not feel like you're like, wow, I don't even know if I'm really qualified for this. But just remember that like a lot of other people, are doing similar things to get the positions, as in building your personal brand, building gaps of experience, looking at different things. You can't really check all the boxes and have all the relevant experience and come in and just master something. Mastering something is very difficult, and it's not something that a lot of people have. For example, there's even gaps of knowledge on people on my team, people who seem like they know everything, and then there's like actually a lot of stuff they don't know too, and they've been at it for so many years. So as you kind of imagine that, you're just kind of like, oh, I guess we're all just kind of imposters trying to kind of like make it and add skills as we go along and try to find roles that we can succeed in. So yeah.
Alex, that is such a great point. We can never know everything, right? And some of those who have been in a profession for 50 years are still learning new things. And it does take a number of years to become skilled and capable in a profession. And I think that's also why Canadians continue to study and learn and grow in their jobs beyond the scope of their job because of that piece. And I really appreciate that you turned that idea of something potentially negative or anxiety provoking and turned it into a positive. It's actually not a bad thing. And if I may add, from my own life experience, I certainly have had imposter syndrome over my years of becoming a professional and going to graduate school. And I actually found it helped open doors for me because I saw things in ways that maybe other people didn't. So sometimes imposter syndrome, through your own anxieties and your own kind of worries that you may not be the best, you may start to develop strategies or ways to cope and grow in a position that ends up being fruitful for other professionals, right? So it's kind of, you can share your tips and guide. Actually, that piece is also linked to mentoring. And I think finding a mentor in a company or organization, if you really are dealing with it heavily, imposter syndrome is really valuable and helpful. And they can coach you through those moments and remind you that you were hired for a reason and you're adding value, right? And final thoughts on imposter syndrome? I have one more question I'd like to ask before we close. And I know we're not going to get to every question that was out there. But the last question I'll ask our panelists, regarding the thank you note, would you recommend to reach out through email or LinkedIn? Which one is more effective? And there's another piece to this question. So for LinkedIn, since your profile photo is there, the professional may know who you are, but there's message character limits and there's a high chance your message might be marked as spam. For email, they may not know who you are because you don't have a photo as part of your email. So any thoughts on thank you notes? I would say for information interviews, like Rob has done many of those, for actual interviewing, post-interview, or maybe when you're doing meeting a network contact like Gayle has talked about, and you want to thank them for meeting with you. So any thoughts?
I have a quick tip, and I'm not sure I'm the best to answer this question. Rebecca, you might be. I usually use LinkedIn. I think that there's no right answer. You could use both. But kind of related to this, one thing that I did for a few roles was in those thank you notes, I would send a document called the 30, 60, 90-day plan of things that I wanted to do in the job in my first 30, 60, 90 days. And that's kind of specific to sales, but you can totally do that for just about any job role. And you can kind of reuse a lot of the information that you use depending on what role it is. That stood out for sure to my current manager. It does take some time, but it definitely took me a long way.
That is so cool. I've actually never done that myself before. And I think that is a piece that all of us, unless they have done it before, could really learn from. That is a really, really neat strategy to, it kind of goes back to that hypothetical, like if you hire me, this is the value I will bring. I say hypothetical as in you haven't done the job yet, not that you're not qualified or capable. It also, I think, helps to maybe alleviate some of that imposter syndrome because you now have a plan for yourself. Doesn't mean that that plan will be completely accepted, but it does mean that you can visualize yourself in the job doing the work over a period of time, which would be 3 months. So that is a really, really cool technique. Has anyone else on the panel tried that before? I haven't, but it will now become part of my toolkit. Any other thoughts, final thoughts? Oh, actually, I should stop here because we only have a few minutes left and I want to say some thank yous. So sorry. If there are final thoughts around how to send a thank you note that you were dying to get out to our audience, please feel free to write it in the chat box and you can share it with all attendees. Of course, like I said, to wrap up, because we only have a few minutes left, all of our attendees are welcome to reach out and ask further questions to our panelists through LinkedIn. And what I'd like to say in terms of closing is, first of all, this was a fantastic panel. You guys, you folks were amazing. I am so, so happy that we were able to secure you tonight. I felt you brought wonderful energy to a virtual space, which is not easy to do. you really addressed the questions, head on, and you obviously prepared your responses for those questions in advance, which I really appreciate as a moderator. So thank you. I feel there was so much learning, and I'm sure some, if not all of us, were taking notes or jotting down mentally about, especially your tips, and the best practices, which are, I think, really great when a panel is happening, that an attendee can walk away not just with a theoretical understanding of a concept, but a tangible approach to how they might tackle their next steps. So I just want to say a very heartfelt thank you. And also a thank you to all the attendees who came this evening and shared their thoughts and questions. Really, really appreciated that. The time just flew by. And I will, that's really it for me. I will wrap up here. Of course, like I said, if anyone wants to reach out to our panelists, you're welcome to do so. Please don't bombard them all tonight. maybe you guys can space yourselves out. I'm just joking around. But and the other thing I'd like to say for any of our attendees, please feel free to reach out to the Career Management Center for any career advising support. Like the panelists that have engaged with you tonight, they did use our services or they did work with us as colleagues at SFU, and it definitely made a difference in their job search process, especially during COVID. So please do reach out to us. We are here for you, and we are around all spring and summer and into the fall. So thank you, everyone, and I hope everyone has a good evening and hope to see your faces again soon.